There were 12 tribes of Israel. 12 tribes of Israel. Israel was originally named Jacob, but his name was changed to Israel. The father of Israel, was Isaac. The father of Isaac was Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob being renamed Israel with the forefathers of the Israelite nation. Jacob had 12 sons. His firstborn son was named Rueben. That's what we're going to talk about today. Rueben, the firstborn son of Jacob, who was renamed Israel. Reuben was born to Jacob through Leah. Leah was the main wife of Jacob. Jacob had 4 wives. His first wife was Leah, and her maidservant was Zilpah. His second wife was Rachel, and the maidservant of Rachel was Bilhah. So Reuben was the firstborn son of Jacob. From Leah, Jacob begat Reuben, also Simeon, Levi, Yehuda, Issachar, and Zebulun. Also from the maidservant of Leah, Jacob begat Gad and Ashur, the tribes of Gad and Ashur. From Rachel, the second wife, the sister of Leah, Jacob begat Joseph and Benjamin. From Bilhah, the maidservant of Rachel, Jacob begat Dan and Naphtali. The Bible speaks of Reuben. 1 Chronicles 5 tells us, 1 Chronicles 5:1, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel. He was the firstborn. But when he defiled and he polluted his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, but not to be reckoned in the genealogy as firstborn. Because Judah prevailed above his brothers, and the one appointed as prince was to be from him. But the birthright belonged to Joseph, and the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, were Hanok and Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. So we have Reuben as the firstborn son of Jacob, but Reuben behaved inappropriately with Bilhah, one of the concubines of his father, and his birthright was given to Joseph. The sons of Joseph were Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh became tribes in their own right. Judah was also a leading tribe, and the future Messiah, the king, the right to be king in principle, was given to Judah. But the birthright belonged to Joseph. Nevertheless, Reuben also had sons who were important. The firstborn, Reuben was technically the firstborn son of Israel. And the sons of Reuben were Hanok and Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Eventually, these 12 tribes divided into 2 different sections. One section was known as Judah, the kingdom of Judah, and its inhabitants are known as Jews. And it involved the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Levi, and also represented minorities of the other tribes. They became the Jews. The other section was 10 tribes. The other 10 section contained 10 tribes: Reuben, Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, and Ashur, Dan and Naphtali, and also Joseph, who was divided into 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Therefore have 10 tribes. These 10 tribes were conquered by the Assyrians. They were taken into exile by the Assyrians, and they got lost. They lost consciousness of their ancestry of where they came from, of who they were, and they moved out. They were moved out, or were moved out by others. Eventually, through different pathways, they all moved to the north and the west, and all converged into Western Europe. And that is where their descendants are to be found there, in areas of Western and Northwestern Europe, and also in nations that spring up out of them. That is the America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. So we had the tribe of Reuben. The tribe of Reuben, who technically was the firstborn, apparently settled in Western Europe, in the area of France, to the north and east of France, and all that region. We find descendants of Reuben. And we are told in 1 Chronicles 5, verse 3 onwards, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi, the descendant of Joel, Shemaiah's son, Gog his son, Shimei his son, Micah his son, Be'eriah his son, Riah his son, Baal his son, Be'erah his son, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, took into exile. And as we said, we find Reuben primarily in France, but also in other areas around France. The name for France in Hebrew is Tserefath, or Tserefath. It's sometimes spelled with a Z, Tserefath, but in Hebrew it has a TS sound, a tsa, Tserefath. At all events, that is the region in Hebrew where descendants of Reuben and other tribes were to be found. Book of Obadiah. The book of Obadiah is a prophecy speaking about the end times, about the future war between descendants of Edom, that is Esau. Esau was the twin brother of Jacob, and they are destined to struggle between themselves, and in the end there will be war, end times. There will be wars between them, and eventually the Israelites will be successful. We find an expression in the book of Obadiah 1:20, it says, "And the exiles of this host of the sons of Israel, who are among the Canaanites as far as Tserefath." That is how it is translated in most translations. So most translations into English, that's what it says. The exiles of this host of the sons of Israel, who are among the Canaanites as far as Tserefath. And the Hebrew can lend itself to this translation. An alternative way of translating the Hebrew is to understand it as saying this first exile of this host of the sons of Israel is this first exile of the sons of Israel who are among the Canaanites as far as Tserefath. And Rashi understands it to be saying that. And also Rashi understands it to be hinting at the fact that the verse is applying itself to the dispersed of Israel from the lost tribes of Israel, the first ones to be exiled. Paraphrasing the different commentators, the early commentators, we find this verse saying this first exile of the 10 tribes of Israel, who dwelt from Germany, that is the Canaanites, Ibn Ezra, and Holland, Jewish sources, even unto France, Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Radak, Babno, Darso, Frame, and England. That is Tserefath, according to Abarbanel, who identifies Tserefath with both France and England. And the different commentators say that the lost 10 tribes are in that area, are in that general region. Region of France, also England, also the area to the north of France and to the east of France, to some degree or other. We have the description of the tribe of Reuben. In Numbers 26, verse 5 onwards, it says, Reuben was the firstborn of Israel. The children of Reuben were of Hanok, the family of the Hanokites, of Palu, the family of the Paluites, of Hezron, the family of the Hezronites, of Carmi, the family of the Carmites. Name Reuben, and Hebrew means see a son. It's recorded in the Ripuarian Franks, who originally settled along the Rhine River, but later moved somewhat to the south into France, and they are also known as the Ribuari and as Ruby. And this name Ribuari could mean also Reuben, because Ru is part of the name of Reuben, and Ribuari is similar to an Aramaic way of saying son of, see a son. Also, we have an inscription for east of the Jordan dating to around 750 BCE, indicating that east of the Jordan, they used a dialect of mixed Aramaic and Hebrew, so this would fit them using such a name. The area east of the Jordan was known as Gilead, and that was where Reuben and the tribe of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh were to be found. The tribe of Manasseh was divided into two sections. One section was to the west of the Jordan, another section was to the east of the Jordan. The section of Manasseh east of the Jordan was associated with Reuben and with Gad. And France is named after the Franks. France is named after the Franks, and we saw that the leading segment of the Franks were known as Ribuari or Ruby, which records the very name Reuben. Also, the sons of Reuben were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Hanok means inauguration or education. Palu means distinction. Hezron connotes dweller of the courtyard, and Carmi may derive from the word kerem, meaning vineyard. And these words fit aspects of the French character. The French are known for emphasis on academic proclivities. They have this attitude of academic achievement. The Sorbonne University is world renowned. The French are also well known for placing an emphasis on quality, on perfumes, wines, fashion, and so on, which fits their other name of the sons of Reuben, Palu, or Palu, connoting distinction or superlative achievement. Palu. The other name, Hezron, meaning dweller of the courtyard, also may denote an aspect of proprietorship. French are both known for their peasants, their peasant culture, and also for their aristocracy. And both segments of the population may be defined in some sense by the term Hezron in Hebrew. The word Carmi is derived from Kerem, meaning vineyard, and the French too produce wine, a lot of wine, a lot both in quantity and quality. The French are well renowned for their wines. Now, Reuben, whilst he was in the land of Israel, he was bordered by the tribe of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh, east of the Jordan, and they worked together, they moved together. When they wanted to stay in that area, they sent representatives to Moses to request it of him. They cooperated. They were a unit. Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh were a unit in their own right. And they had occupied the area of Gilead, east of the Jordan. In Joshua 22 tells us in verse 9, and the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh returned and departed from the children of Israel out of Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go into the country of Gilead, to the land of their possession, whereof they were possessed. So they had been associated with Gilead, as had the other tribes in that area. And the early inhabitants of France were known as Galli and as Galati. Galati is another form of the term Gilead. In French Bibles, Galati is the translation for Gileadi. In the land of Israel, Gilead was also the name of a major clan in Manasseh, and also to the whole area east of the Jordan, including the area pertaining to Rueben. So Galati was an early name for a good section of France, and Galati was also a name, a version of the name Gileadi of Gilead. As we mentioned, they were together with the half tribe of Manasseh and with the tribe of Gad. Gad gave rise to the Goths. The Goths were to be found in Sweden and also amongst the Gothic peoples. Goth is another way in biblical history of pronouncing the word Gad. Also, the Goths themselves, in place names, we find the element Gad. It is often taken to indicate the presence of the tribe of Gad, the Goths having been in that region. So Goth indicates the tribe of Gad, and our tribe of Manasseh were together with Reuben. The Goths at one stage, the Goths in the Visigoth kingdom, 400s, 700s, they ruled over southwest Gaul. After that, they were pushed into Spain, but many of them remained in that area of France, of Gaul. And another branch of the Goths, the Ostrogoths, they ruled over parts of Italy, Switzerland, and southeast France. So there were Goths in that region, and they were together neighboring the Ribuari Franks. You had the half tribe of Manasseh. One of the clans of the half tribe of Manasseh were the Parisies, descendants of Perush, the Parisi. They gave their name to the city of Paris. Paris, the capital of France. Now, Reuben is described as bringing mandrakes to his mother. Mandrakes, in Hebrew, Dudaim, mandrakes were considered to have had aphrodisiacal properties, that is, they strengthened the power of the man when he is performing his manly duties. And also they had the ability to induce pregnancy. They were, in addition to that, they were quite rare and they were very much valued. So Reuben found these mandrakes and they brought them to his mother Leah. And apparently Leah was sitting there together with Rachel, her sister, and also the wife of their mutual husband. And Rachel requested from Leah that she should receive these mandrakes, that Leah should give these mandrakes to her. And Leah agreed on condition that Rachel should give their turn, the turn that she had to be with their husband, to her. And Rachel agreed. And from that union was born Issachar. Also, Reuben was reported to have acted somewhat incorrectly with Bilhah, the concubine of his father. See Genesis 35:22. And the French are considered to have this tendency. Paris is referred to as the city of love. The French have a reputation for being romantic. This may be somewhat exaggerated and may not be exactly correct, but they do have this reputation. And Paris is also known as being a city of romance. So it doesn't come from nowhere. So we see this as being an aspect of the characteristics of Reuben. Also, we find that Reuben had a lot of cattle. Numbers 32:1, it says the descendants of Reuben and Gad, the descendants of Reuben and Gad had an abundance of livestock, very numerous. They saw the land of Yair and the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock, therefore they wanted to settle there. And France, as today, produces has a lot of cattle and sheep, has a lot of milk products and dairy products. French cheeses have an international reputation. France is the most important country for producing cheese in the world. France produces 300 to 400 different types of cheese. According to some, one kind of cheese for each day of the year. It's known as the country of 300 cheeses. And the French see the production of cheese as part of their national identity. This still was an aspect of Reuben. France also produces wine. One of the sons of Reuben was known as Kami, meaning vineyard. Also, we find references in the Bible to the production of wine in the area of Reuben. It says in Isaiah 16:8-9, therefore will bewail with the weeping of Yair, the vine of Sidma, I'll water you with tears, my O Heshbon and Neriela, for the shouting, for thy summer fruits, and for the harvest is fallen. That is in Isaiah 16, verses 8-9. Also in Jeremiah chapter 48, verse 32, it says, O vine of Sidma, I will weep for you. For the weeping of Jazer, your plants have gone over the sea. They reach even to the sea of Yair. The sport has fallen upon your summer fruits, and upon your vintage. That is your production of wine. So Reuben did produce wine. That was what he was known for, according to the Bible. This observation concerning the area of Reuben being known for the production of wine was pointed out by the researcher Brit-Am. We borrowed it from him. Concerning the future is a tradition, the Zohar and Vayichi. He says that Reuben will attempt to conquer the land of Israel towards the end times. What exactly this means is not certain, but we should keep it in mind. We also should note that the Crusades were an attempt by the English and the French, and afterwards the Germans and others to conquer the Holy Land. The French were the major players, were probably those who were the most important amongst the different groups who made this attempt. Also later, Napoleon attempted to conquer the region, and he besieged Akko, the city of Akko, in the land of Israel, and he was defeated. But he had an interest in it. Besieging Akko, the leader of the defense forces on behalf of the Turks, at that time ruled the city, was a Jew, and Napoleon made a declaration that if he conquers the land, he will allow the Jews to return and establish a land of their own in that region. but he was defeated, so we don't know if he was we don't know how genuine he was. But it's interesting that he made the declaration, and and that was close to the period when the movement of Zionism began amongst the Jews in Europe, and eventually they did achieve and managed to return to their own land with the help of the British. So we don't know how these things will turn out, but it's worth noting. There are indications, there are proofs that the French are descended from Reuben. Also, other tribes are in the area. We find the Franks also have been in Belgium and in Holland and in Germany, and they ruled over that region, but they were not necessarily the majority elements in the population, but they were there. And we also identify these peoples with Israelites. We find amongst the Belgians both descendants of Rueben and descendants of Benjamin and other tribes. Amongst the Dutch, we find descendants of Zebulun and so on. Should also note that the prophecy of Obadiah that we quoted, prophecy of Obadiah that we quoted from, mentions the lost 10 tribes in Obadiah 1:20. It mentions the exiles of this host of the sons of Israel, or the exiles of this first exile of the sons of Israel, who are among the Canaanites as far as Tserefath, or are to be found from the Canaanites up until Tserefath, and that is the reference. And Jewish sages such as Rashi, such as Nachmanides, such as Abarbanel, take this as applied to the lost 10 tribes in the end times, and identify the region with France. The Abarbanel says that Tserefath means both England and France. Nachmanides says it means the area of the far north. And Rashi says it applies to France. Mentions the Canaanites also as being involved. The Canaanites were people from the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, but they had moved out. According to Rashi, most of them had been driven out of the land of Israel when Joshua ben Nun conquered it, and they also had gone to Europe first, and they had settled there. And according to the different sources, some say the Canaanites came to dominate Germany. So it is referring to Germany. So that too is a possibility. We find amongst the Germans there wants to have been many descendants from Israelites, especially from Manasseh. Half Manasseh was together with Reuben, and but the indications are that most of these descendants of Israel left the country in the 1800s at a very late date, 1700s, 1800s, and a good portion of them moved to North America. And therefore the Germans, those of Germanic descent in North America, are different from those who remained behind on the whole. And they are also descended from Israel. And we find historically that those who left America for the USA were described as being different as being different physically, even physically in their physical features from those who remain behind. So this too is a possibility that has to be considered. Thank you, may the Lord God of Israel bless you.